And in discussing this, what we're going to talk about is what you're seeing as a mirror. And we're going to talk about some commonalities between reality and what you normally see in the mirror. Because what I want you to do is begin to understand how reality works. And once you understand this, then you can be more apt to be able to use it more effectively. So again, we're going to be discussing the mirror of reality. Now, as always, I will be using an acrostic, and the acrostic is reflection. Now, of course, the acrostic will be placed in the notes once the talk is upgraded and so forth, and I put the banner and so forth on it. So it take me about an hour or so to have all that done, but don't worry about that. That will get done. But like I said, the notes will be in the, when you go down through the comments and so forth, the notes will be there. So the description and so forth. So you'll be able to see the notes. So don't worry about that. But again, what we're going to be discussing today is the mirror of reality and how this applies to you. So let's go on and get started. Let me go on and get a sip of water here. Again, we're going to be using the acrostic reflection. And so the first letter in the reflection acrostic is R. And R basically stands for role reversal. Now, what does that mean when it comes to the mirror of reality? When you're looking in the mirror, what you typically see, if I had words on my shirt, for example, those words would appear in the mirror backwards. What we see in reality is a reflection, but we often think that people see what we see in the mirror, but what they actually see is the reverse of us. So what we see that's on our right side, they see on their left side. And so what we're going to be doing is discussing in the role reversal of the mirror, reality tends to occupy or operate in the reverse of what we think that it should. For example, most of us operate from a have, do, be. If I have enough money, if I have the right relationship, if I have the right person, if I have, the right this or that, then I'll be happy. And that's actually the reverse of how the mirror of reality works. Normally, when you get into a state of being, be, do, have. So when you're being the person, and see, I tell people, I was talking to a client recently. Good afternoon. Good to see you. I was telling a client recently, and I said, listen, you're starting your brand, and what you need to do right down as starting your brand is operate from the billionaire brand that you're going to produce. Neville called this living in the end. Now, people look at outward appearance. They look at the mirror and they say, well, in the mirror, I don't have that already. But the mirror is the byproduct of what it is that we've thought most often up until this moment. So she was looking in the mirror and she almost thought it laughable that she could create a billion-dollar brand. I said, you have to go to the end of the person that you want to become. So when we're looking in the mirror, we have to reverse the role of what it is. You can't look at the mirror from where it is that, good to see you. You can't look from the mirror at where you're at the moment, because see, everything at the moment is the byproduct of what you thought up until this moment. So when we're looking at the R, or the role reversal, you have to look from the internal state of who you're being, as it were. And this is why it's important to shift the image in your mind, because that's going to determine the projection of what you're seeing in this realm called reality. But understand this, when you begin to shift the image of yourself, who you're doing, being, and having at the moment, and you start seeing yourself from your future self. I don't know how many of you are old enough, but the good thing is we can see it on video now. But there was a movie many years ago with a gentleman by the name of Michael J. Fox, and it was called Back to the Future. So he would go into the future and see what was happening in the future, and then come back to the present and start making adjustments, or he would go back to the past and he would make adjustments. And so I often like saying this: remember your future and imagine your past. Now, people say, well, what does that mean? When we're talking about the role reversal, you have to remember and understand this. Your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between that which you're imagining and that which you're actually experiencing at the moment. So when you begin to remember your past, your future as a successful entrepreneur, being this billion-dollar mogul, as it were, and whatever your brand is, it doesn't matter. When you start remembering your future, your subconscious mind will begin to look for the evidence in your current reality to make that a possibility, a reality, as it were. When you start imagining your past, start imagining your past the way that you wanted it to be. Say that you had some circumstances and things that happened in your life that you didn't like. People say, well, you can't do that. Of course you can. Of course you can. You start imagining that experience that you had the way that you wanted it to play out. Now, as you begin to envision and project these images on the wall of your imagination, your subconscious mind, your body, your spirit will begin to see those events as actually happening, whether you're going to the future or you're going to the past. So understand this about the mirror. The mirror doesn't care what you reflect upon it. So let me be clear. Reality doesn't care what you reflect upon it, but whatever you're holding in reality long enough, the hologram called reality long enough, that's what you're going to start seeing the evidence of. And this is why it's important that you watch what you're pouring into your spirit, your psyche, most often, because what you're going to do is see more evidence of that. I now scroll on my phone when I'm uploading videos and so forth. I actually turn my volume down because a lot of stuff that's popping up on my screen, I don't want to hear it. It's enough that I'm seeing it and I can scroll past it. But if I turn my volume down, they don't have my attention. Then those things that I want to see, then of course I can turn the volume up and I can watch those things. What I'm saying to you creators is you have to be mindful of what you're picturing or out picturing in this thing called reality, or the hologram, or this mirror called reality. Because see, the mirror is only a reflection. It doesn't care what you reflect upon it. But whatever you're holding in consciousness most often, that's what's going to show up in the mirror. And we don't like hearing that because that means that we have accountability, we have responsibility. And responsibility doesn't mean blame. It means I'm going to be mindful of what it is that I'm out picturing most often. Now, do we slip? Do we fall short? Absolutely. But the goal is to do it more often than not. And like I said, many people, especially those who follow the techniques and principles of a Neville Goddard, for example, they'll say, well, 5 to 15 minutes before going to bed, they want to start affirming things, positive things, and so forth. But 23 hours and 45 minutes, sometimes 55 minutes, so 23 hours and 55 minutes, they thought nothing but negativity all day. So 5 minutes before going to bed, they said, well, now let me go and think something positive. And then they go into the sleep state and they have this nightmare. And they said, well, I did the principle, in a state akin to sleep, going to sleep, I imagine. But your subconscious mind is like a computer. And what it's doing is pulling from the information that you've watched most persistently throughout your day. And it may be able to incorporate those last 5 minutes, but what have you poured into your mind for the majority of the day? This is why I say, when you start living from the reflection of who it is that you're doing, being, and having, as you do that throughout the day, that becomes your norm. There's something in a mirror, and they call it silvering. And silvering is the coating that's placed in the mirror, and depending upon the quality of the silvering that's placed in the mirror, it's going to determine the reflection. So this is why you can go into and of course the lighting also plays a part. You can go into a department store and you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, man, I'm looking pretty good. And then you get in your car and you look at your rear view mirror, you're like, what happened? It's because They have a different quality of silvering in the background. Good to see you. They have a different quality of silvering in the background. So why is this relevant to you? I want your silvering to be a mantra. Every day and every way, I'm becoming better and better. I have a lavish, steady, dependable income consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. I don't know what your silvering is going to be, but create you an affirmation, a mantra. Life is always working out for me. Life is always seeing how to make me more abundant. Life is so beautiful. Whatever that reason why you want this silvering in the background of your mirror, because that's going to be the energy, the vibration, the frequency that you're holding most often. Now, will you slip? Absolutely. But as you continue to say that, I tell often about a multi-millionaire, billionaire, today's standard, W. Clement Stones. Early on, I don't know where he got this, but he was an avid reader. He was a studier of new thought and so forth. He would often say that life is conspiring for his good. Now, there was a scripture that all things are working together for the good of those who love God. So he took that and applied it to his life. He said, life is conspiring for my good. And no matter what the situation was, no matter what was going on, he would say, how is this thing, this situation, even though it was bad, he said, how is this thing working out for my good? And he would find a silvering in the background, because see, that was his silvering. Create a silvering, that's the solution in the back of the mirror for your day. Because see, reality is only reflecting what it is that you're projecting by way of your predominant thoughts, words, and actions, and attitudes, and dispositions, and so forth. So reverse the role. Whatever it is that you want to see, begin to reverse the role. Reverse that. If you don't have it already, now, hypothetically speaking, if you already have what it is that you want to be, do, or have, you don't have to change anything. But if you're looking in the mirror of reality, and you're like, life sucks, this is terrible, things always happen to me, why does this always happen to me? Then you need to get some new silvering in your background, and you need to begin to reverse the role. But you start by getting the image in mind, because see, that image that you have in mind is going to be the projection that's going to show up in your reality. I'm going to talk about some other things, so I don't want to jump ahead and get ahead, but understand this. That reflection that you're seeing in the mirror, sometimes, most often, all the time, let me go on and say it that way, there's a delay. So the time that you show up in the mirror and the time that that reflection shows, there's a delay. Now, because it looks like it's instantaneously, I show up in the mirror and all of a sudden my image is there in the mirror, I think that it doesn't. Why am I saying this to you? Sometimes the image that you're holding or that you're projecting by way of your predominant thoughts, words, actions, dispositions, attitudes, and so forth, because it doesn't show up immediately, you say this stuff doesn't work. Nobody sows a seed in the ground and expects to get a jack and a beanstalk overnight. Now, are there those exceptions? Absolutely. But it's not the norm. Neville used to say this, that every seed has its own appointed time. So whether you're talking about a baby, if you're talking about a puppy, if you're talking about an elephant, if you're talking about a giraffe, depending upon the individual seed that's being sown, even with plants, depending upon the seed being sown, every seed has its own appointed time. Okay, so role reversal, reverse that role. Second thing in the reflection acronym or the acrostic, you have to embody the assumption. I've kind of touched on that, but I want to go a little bit deeper. When you're looking at the mirror and that thing that you're assuming, that person that you're assuming, the things that you're assuming that's going to show up in your life, everything is a reflection of your dominant assumption. So Mr. Lindo often says this, we don't necessarily get what we want. We get what we expect. Why is expectation or assumption much deeper than the level of want and need and so forth? Because that's happening at your core level. So it says this, that as a person, man, woman, believes in his, her heart, so is she, so does she. So has she. Now, I added those last two, but the bottom line, you're becoming what you believe at your core level. And we'll deal with this in a second. But this is why it's important that you have to embody. Far too many people are trying to manifest. And when they try to manifest, they say, well, I'm going to practice this technique and so forth. They don't become. See, right now, I say it often, but I have to say it right now at this point. You're an energetic being. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. Why is this relevant? Because depending upon what you're holding in frequency, vibration, that's what you're clothing yourself in. I did a short recently, and Mr. Lindo was talking about, being mindful of your moods because moods are creative. When you start operating from a vibration of success, just because all of a sudden you don't get this $1 million deal doesn't mean that it's not working. Like I said, every seed has its own appointed time, but you have to embody. Many people are thinking at a head level about manifestation, but they haven't embodied and said, this is who I am. No matter what's showing up in reality, understand this. I told you there's a delay in reality. So when you decide that you're going to be this multimillionaire, when you decide that you're going to be in this loving relationship, when you decide that health is going to improve, we go, as Master Teacher tells us not to, but we go and we look at reality and we started judging based off of reality. And we say, well, but you're looking at the mirror. You just did a workout. Now you've been trying to get a few pounds, but you just started the workout. So initially in the mirror, you're seeing this frame of a person. You're like, that's not who I want to be. Sometimes you have to look away from the mirror and you have to go into your imagination and get a picture in your mind's eye of the person that you're going to be, do, or have. Now, just because that person doesn't show up in the mirror immediately, you say, I might as well give up. I might as well go back to my old routine, to my own. They weren't serving you. So even if you're taking on a new mindset, if your old routine wasn't serving you anyway, why go back? Now, and of course, I understand that there's that thing called habit, because we've done something long enough in routine and so forth that it's just who we happen to believe ourselves to be. But going back to what I said about embodiment, you are who you imagine yourself to be most often. Right now, who you are at the moment is who you've imagined yourself to be most often. When you start changing who it is that you've imagined yourself to be most often, this is powerful. If you get what I'm saying, you're simply who you are at the moment, because when Master Teacher was walking the earth, they said of him, we know his brothers, we know his father, we know his mother, we know his sisters. Aren't they amongst us? We grew up with this guy. And yet he was walking around doing these miraculous works. And he said to the crowd, he didn't say this solely to the disciples. He says, the works that I've done, even greater works will you do. But it requires that you embody, put off the old man, as Paul called it, and put on the new man. We do this every day, but we do it unaware. Now, you say, well, Coach, I don't put on new. When, let's say I'm talking, and I can do a lot of that, but let's say I'm talking, and there's something that I say that resonates with your spirit, and at that moment, you own it. Good to see you. At that moment, you own it. At that moment, you've just made a change. You were born again. You're watching a program, something hits you, you hear a song, and all of a sudden there's something that resonates, and you say, I get it. Now, not only do I get it, I'm starting to live from it. I'm starting to be it. I'm going to incorporate that. A brother had put a post out there, and Sam had put a post out there, and it was of Esther Hicks. And it just so resonated with me. I'm like, this so resonated with me, I'm going to repost it. And then, I added some text and things like that. But it was just something that resonated. Because of what she said, I heard it 1,000 times before. I've even said it in my own way, but at that moment, there was a rebirth process in me because there was something in that message that resonated with me. It's like I listen to Bill Donahue or whomever, and all of a sudden there's something that's said that resonates. I'm like, I'm going to own that. You understand what I'm saying? All of a sudden, I'm not the same person I was even a moment ago. We embody new ideologies all the time. What I'm asking you to do is to do it consciously. Embody the person that you want to be. And just because he, she hasn't shown up in the mirror immediately, it doesn't mean that it's not taken. You just have to persist until that becomes. And what's going to happen if you persist? All the world around you will begin to acquiesce, take on the shape, take on the belief that you've taken on of yourself. And some people are even going to want to fight about it. Isn't that Sam that blah, 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 blah? Isn't that Violet blah, 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 blah? Isn't that Tyrone? Whomever. Because they want to pull you back into the old embodiment. But you don't have to go back there. Now, will you have moments of reflection? Absolutely. But that's no longer who you are. Okay, so embody. So role reversal. If what you're seeing in the mirror, change the role. Embody that new assumption. Allow that to become your new reality. If you stick with it long enough, if I was the person that they said I was when I was a kid or a young man, my brother and I were talking about this the other day. He's like, we would be incarcerated, we would be dead, we wouldn't be telling our story based off of the evidence of back then. You understand what I'm saying? Somebody had sent me a video in my Facebook group, and it was about bad money. And I'm not getting into any politics. I'm just bringing about a point. And they showed a picture of Bad Bunny 10 years ago. And then this mega star that he is today in a 10-year span. Now, understand this, we're seeing the 10-year span, but it happened much sooner than that. Working that grocery store, there had to be a shift in mindset. There were multiple shifts in mindset. And my question is to you creators, what about you? Can you see bigger, better, more than, Neville used to say, to see better than the best you know? Can you see better than, even though you don't know how it's going to show up? You can't know. Understand that. You can't know the bridge of it. Your job is to get the image in mind. I often tell about J.D. Rockefeller. Poor boy couldn't even get in the school picture. But he saw himself being painted, his portrait being painted by the most famous artist in the world, even though he did not know how it was going to take place. He went through trial after trial and so forth, and businesses being lost and almost going broke, sometimes going to the bank and saying, listen, I need more money. But he kept seeing the end in mind. This is not something that just applies to the wealthy or the athlete or the actor. It applies to you. I had put a post up recently about Al Pacino, and he was talking about how to get into state, even though he was talking about an acting role. Shakespeare says all the world is stage, and we're merely actors upon this stage. So somebody came along and said, well, that doesn't apply to that, it applies to acting. Absolutely not solely to acting. When you're looking at things from a metaphysical perspective, you see the ordinary, and then you go in and you see the extraordinary. You are able to extract the extraordinary. And I'm sure that Mr. Al Pacino has no problem with me using his story to motivate you to get into a state that embodies the person that you want to be, do, or have. And he says, you just keep playing the role over, and over again until it's who you are. This is why Terrence Howard was being interviewed. And he says, the hardest thing about acting when you get into those roles is snapping out of the roles, because you become those people. And he said, there's a part of Anthony Hopkins, this Hannibal Lecter. And this is why I tell somebody, they all, this person is so spiritual and they're so enlightened. I said, they're just like you. They're just like you. We put on our best face when we're in front of the camera, but the shortcomings and the things that you deal with, we all deal with. And I say this to you creators because I don't want you to think that these people got something that you don't have. No, they're just not showing you that other side of them. Neville said at one point, he said, listen, you know, I've been given this great insight. I've been given so many things by what he says, but if ever a time comes, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but if ever a time comes where I feel that my wife or my daughter is threatened, he says, you're going to see a side of me, even though I'm this spiritual person, had all these different experiences, you're going to see a side of me that you don't want to see. What am I saying to you? You're a multitude of people. You're not just who it is that you are. You're this energetic being, this spiritual being having a human experience. The wonderful thing about this, and why I keep repeating it, good to see you, why I keep repeating it is because I want you to know that you can clothe yourself in any new persona. Now, we've been told when we clothe ourselves in that new persona, oh, that's just, imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is thinking that you're less than divine and that you can't clothe yourself in a new ideology, a new personality, and become somebody else. That's the imposter syndrome. But you being able to shift states, in my Father's house there are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you. But if I go, I come back, because I go and prepare a place for you. You go into the future of the person that you want to be, do, or have. You get an image of that. And if you decide to change it, you can. I'm just saying, if you want to be a multi-millionaire, if you want to start a business, if you want to be in a loving relationship, you go to the end of the person that you want to be, do, or have. You get an image of that person. You come back to the future in your DeLorean, like Michael J. Fox, for those who are familiar with Back to the Future, and you come back and you start occupying and being that person now. Embody the person that you want to be. Let's get into the next one. So the F in the reflection, and again, all these are going to be in the notes when I update them. F stands for focus determines your destiny. What you give your attention to, and this is why I told you earlier, when I'm sitting and I'm watching, I'm scrolling through and I'm uploading videos and so forth on my phone and computer, a lot of stuff shows up when I'm on these different platforms. I have to mute or silence my phone, so all this noise, I'm seeing the images, but I can look at most of them and say, that's not something I want to entertain. Good to see you, Sid. I can look at something and say, that's not something I want to entertain. So I scroll on past that, because it used to be everything was pulling for your attention. Hey, you making that dream come true. My sister, she's got these videos on TikTok, and what she does is she does these hula hoop exercises. And I mean, it's amazing to me because she can pretty much go all day. She's going hours and doing this hula hoop, but she's in outstanding shape, and I can see why. So she's basically let me know she's doing her thing and listening to my thing, so I appreciate you. Okay, so what is it that you want to be, do, or have? See, she's seeing herself as a life changer. Even though everything that she wants hasn't shown up yet, she's occupying that state of the person that she wants to be, do, or have. And what she does know, because in her practice of being a musician, doing the acting, doing the various things, she's seen things show up. But she's also seen the naysayers. What about you? Understand this, when you start living from your greatness, the naysayers are going to show up. They can't not, because see, what they see, you act as a condemnation. Let me tell you a quick story. Billy Graham was on the golf course, and this is not a religious story, but it's kind of a funny story, and you'll understand once I get done with the story. Billy Graham was on the golf course. He was just hitting golf balls and so forth, and this one gentleman was really upset, and he told his friend, I just can't stand that man. He said, what did he say to you? He said, he didn't say anything. I just know who he is. Just his presence threw the man off. Just by you being great, you're going to throw some people off. And they're going to try to find anything they can use to dissuade you from being great. And great is what it means to you. Success is what it is. I'm not trying to give you the definition of great. Whatever that is to you, you living your best life. You simply doing that is going to act as a repellent for those who have settled for less. Okay, so focus on who it is. If what you're giving your attention, and understand this, it's not only your thinking that's creating your world, it's also the thinking of the collective. So Master Teacher says, be in the world, but not of the world. Don't be of that world mindset. But if that's what you're consistently, persistently pouring into your life, your mind, your eye gate, your ear gate, then that's what's going to consistently, persistently show up. So be mindful when you're watching something. Mr. Lindo often say that a thought arises. And he's like, where is that taking me? Do I want to entertain? Do I want that to show up in my life? You got to start asking yourself when you're entertaining something. Some people wonder why they're not experiencing the life that they desire. And a lot of it's because what they're consistently, persistently pouring into their mind gate, their eye gate, their ear gate. And they think that they can partake of that mess, garbage in, garbage out. They think that they can partake of that mess and it not affect them. Well, I can make a distinction. I can separate that. But then they keep wondering why that stuff keeps showing up in their life. It's like the person that's attracted to drama. Day in and day out, they're watching things pertaining to drama. Good to see you. They're watching things pertaining to drama, and they're like, I don't know why drama keeps showing up in my life. Focus on what's taking you. Your focus, of course, I remember you. Good to see you. Your focus is what's creating what shows up in your life. It acts as a magnet of sort. We call it law of attraction. It says, as a man, woman believes in their heart what they're giving their attention to, so is she. Jesus said it this way, that be it done unto you as you believe. So why do people pay trillions of dollars? And by the way, thanks for showing up. It's been a while, but thanks for showing up. Why do people pay trillions of dollars to get your attention? We're told to pay attention because they know if they have your attention, Mr. Lindo says, what has your attention has your life. They have your life. Be mindful, creators. Now, do we slip? Do I watch action movies? Absolutely. But I also understand that I get into a certain state. All of a sudden I'm kicking and throwing punches like I'm a kung fu man. They do influence us. I have to be mindful when I'm having conversations after, watching action movies, because there's a different dynamics that I'm operating from. I've entered into that state. So until I allow that to subside, I have to be mindful. It used to be when I was working with corporate America, I would be in the workplace, and sometimes I would have certain coworkers and peers that I would work with, and we would have these confrontations, these passionate talks. And when I would come home, I would want to have these passionate talks. And I had to, so when I would come home, I would tell my wife, give me about 15 minutes. I had to wind down because I was still holding that energy. And not only the energy from work, then dealing with a 45-minute drive and dealing with, the different people and the different attitudes in this drive, in this commute. I was bringing all that home, and I had to learn to leave it at the door. Another time, I want you to understand the power of your focus. Playing basketball, it wasn't like I was all that great at playing basketball, but I enjoyed it. And so me and a couple of friends were playing. This was many years ago. And at this point, if I cursed at that time, I curse a lot more now, but if I cursed once or twice a year, what was going on, though, there was a gentleman on the court, and every other word of his was profanity. By the end of my playing that game, at that point I was single, but at the end of me playing that game, I found myself using profanity more than I had for years. And it was just because of the influence. This is why it's important that we have to be mindful of what we're giving our attention to. And like I said, we're all susceptible. We're all susceptible. If you're pouring negativity into your life, day in, day out, 24/7, the things that you're scrolling, it's about drama, it's about this, about politics, whatever. I'm not telling you what, I'm just saying, if that's your focus, that's what you're going to see most often, and that's what you're going to see showing up in your life. Okay, so determine your focus. L stands for look for patterns. Life has no agenda of its own. A lot of times people say, well, I'm just waiting on God to show me what to do. And I'm not discounting that. But God wants to do what you want to do. And I know that's going to sound sacrilege. It says, what you bind loose on earth will be loosed or bound in heaven. What that says is that heaven is going to agree with you. So if you say, I want to be, years ago, another story, years ago, when I was saved at the age of 14, got into the military, ran buck wild, wanted to settle down. My mom told me, I was in California at the time, my mom said, you got an uncle that's staying in California. I hooked up with my uncle. He was going to a particular church, kind of a cult. I didn't know it at the time, so I started joining the church. I had my uniforms in Taekwondo. I had achieved a black belt when I was in Korea. I had a portfolio of artwork that I believed that God was having me get rid of all that stuff that pertained to my old life. God didn't ask me to do that. That was DiCarlo, but it was because of the influence. What am I saying to you? I wanted to do something in music. God would have been okay with me doing something in music. It's what I believe that God had for me. What am I saying to you? God is so vast. Whatever you believe about God, that God wants to express himself, herself, itself in you as you. Somebody got on this talk, last week, and they said, what do I need to do to achieve the works of Neville Goddard? You need to study 8 to 14 hours a day. You need to engross yourself. These are the things that Neville loved to do. We're not going to become a Neville Goddard or Joseph Murphy or Joe Dispenza or whomever by osmosis. We have to put the time in. We have to clothe millionaire, successful business person. You have to clothe yourself in that persona and start learning what it is that that persona does, and you have to start living from it. God doesn't need another Reverend Ike, another Neville Goddard, another Joseph Murphy, or whomever the teacher, Esther Hicks, or whomever. He needs you to be you and express himself, herself, itself as you. This is why we were called. As we do that, then we discover why we're here, our purpose. So somebody may be called to do the mission field. I'm not discounting for the person, but that's what's in that person to do. God may have you be, as much as people say, oh, no, he wouldn't, have you be a music mogul, if that's your call, an acting mogul, a top business executive. God needs those too. God occupies those too. What I'm saying to you, God needs you to be and to experience the best version of you as you, whatever that looks like. The flaws, the shortcomings, all of it. Because all of that makes up your world of experience as you. God needs you to be you. And if that means that you want to study 14 hours a day like Neville Goddard did, then do that. But do it as you and watch what the divine does through you as you. Okay, so look for patterns. You're going to see certain things. If, let's use relationship. We could use money, but let's say that I had a friend of mine. He's passed on now, so I don't think he'll mind me using this story. At this point, we were both working at a telecommunications company, and at this point, he had been married like 4 times. And I said, I'm going to change his name just to honor him. I said, Johnny, how is it that you've been married 4 times? He says, DiCarlo, when you get married, they change. I said, well, Johnny, what I find is no judgment, but you're the only common denominator. If you keep going through money. At the end of the month, there's more month than money. If you keep going through relationships, if you keep practicing poor health, look at the patterns. Now you got to see the common denominator. Once let me be clear, you're the common denominator. If what's showing up in your mirror and you're not liking it, look at the patterns, but you gotta be willing, once you see the patterns, to be willing to clothe yourself in a new identity. And I'm not saying it's easy. Sometimes habits, because they're ingrained in our physical dynamics of who we are, it's not always easy. Thanks for checking out. It's not always easy. But once you start identifying, sometimes the most powerful thing that you'll discover is simply becoming aware. Somebody sometimes will come into the YouTube channel and they're like, man, I got it. I'm starting to notice. But they're kind of downcast because they're like, well, but I got so much further to go. I'm like, awareness is the beginning of change. Once you start noticing, Mr. Lindell says, can you think your next thought? Somebody will ponder like, well, what does he mean? Like, yeah, I can think my next thought. He says, I got a suggestion. Don't stop. When you start becoming aware of your self-talk, of those habits that are not serving you, is as you become aware that you can change them. But the problem is, for most of us, we have no clue. So we're on autopilot and we're like, I don't know why this keeps happening to me. Notice the patterns and notice the common denominator. If it keeps happening to you, if one person tells you something about yourself, you could probably write that off. But if 2 or 3 and more tell you the same thing, there comes a time when you have to do a little internal investigation and notice the patterns. So L stands for look for the patterns. I touched on E in the reflection. And again, we're talking reflection, but we're talking about life being a mirror. So in reflection, the acrostic that I'm using, E stands for you got to expect a delay. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Many of us, we look at the image in the mirror and we're like, okay, I want to be buff. I want to be this. I want to be that. I want to have, be, do, whatever. But it's not showing up in the mirror, the hologram called reality. Understand, I know that when you think that when you show up in the mirror, good to see you, Violet. When you show up and you look in the mirror, you think it's instant. But even though if it's a millionth of a second, there's a delay. More so in the hologram called reality. When you start projecting from your mind who it is that you want to be, do, or have, good to have you here. When you start projecting from who it is that you want to be, do, or have, you got to understand there's a delay. And understand this even more. Sometimes that delay may be minutes, days, weeks, months, sometimes years. But if you've embodied yourself and you're starting to live from that and you're starting to see the results, what's the alternative? To go back to what wasn't working? Or to say, listen, I'm going to do this or die. 50 Cent had a movie years ago, Get Rich or Die Trying. Put whatever it is, be successful, loving relationship, better health, but whatever it is, or die trying. Amen. So expect a delay. I spoke on Neville Goddard and he said, listen, every seed has its own appointed time. There's certain things that certain creators will show up and they say, I can help you manifest anything in 24 hours. That's just not the case. Now, let me say this about that. The second you started thinking about it, the manifestation already started. The second, there's a story in scripture, and Daniel had begun to pray for the deliverance of Israel. And an angel came to him, and the angel Gabriel said, Daniel, the very moment that you begun to pray, God heard you and was dispatching an answer. But I was delayed by the prince of Persia, another spirit in the spiritual realm. Just because there's a delay doesn't mean it's God's denial. God's delay is not his denial. Understand this, and there will be some that will disagree. God can only say yes. Now, you say, no, I pray for this. You're missing what I'm going to say, so I need to be clear when I say this. I got a yes acronym. You know, I have acronyms and acrostics for everything. Yes. He says yes immediately. You know, you get that answer, you pray for it, and all of a sudden, somebody knocking on your door, you're getting a phone call, money's in the bank. Then there's eventually. That's that time span where you've prayed for it, but it didn't show up immediately. Eventually. That's the E in the yes acronym. Lastly, it's S. Now, you think, well, you know, this is my vision, this is my dream, I know better than God what I want. There's oftentimes, and I thank God for this, sometimes the divine answers with something better. Some of the things that I pray for, I thank God looking back on those things that I prayed for that I didn't get them. And I know that all of you can identify. Now, there's other things that we think that we pray for that we didn't get. And we're like, I really wish I would have had that. You wish you would have had it because you didn't have the experience of having it. I remember when Michael Jackson was at his peak, people used to say, I wish I was Michael Jackson. I said, you don't know what that man's going through. You don't know the struggles, the pain. And I said, I wish maybe that I had some of the resources of a Michael Jackson. I said, but I don't wish that I was Michael Jackson. And of course, the man, through, you know, a doctor, was killed. He was blamed for so many things. They called him a pedophile, and many people come back and said that just wasn't the case. That is not a life for no amount of money that I would have for myself. What I'm saying to you is, you look at certain people's life, and they have a cliche that says, you know, the life. Thank you. They have a cliche that says that the grass is always greener on the other side. You look at somebody in a relationship, you look at somebody online, you look at these teachers traveling the world, and you think to yourself, man, I wish that I was them. Then moments pass, maybe years or whatever, you find that they were in a tumultuous relationship. They got this debilitating disease. My whole point is, you can't know what someone else is going through. Seek to be the best version of you. We can't even know what Neville got. Neville God gave us all this great teaching, and we think that he had a life without problems. It's just not so. I could touch on a couple of things per me listening to his talks and so forth, but I don't want to touch on that. Neville was a great man, and based off of that, I'm appreciative. What I'm saying to you is, you could wish that you could be exactly like Neville Goddard, but if you take that on, you have to take all the things in the trial. Neville didn't communicate everything that he was going through, and some of the things he did communicate. What I'm saying to you is, life is no respecter of person. We're all experiencing something. We all go through something. We all have our ups and downs. We all sometimes come across, you know, health issues and so forth. Quote by Proctor, something that always stuck with me. Come back and grateful to be me, grateful want to be, got to be me, better to know it's me, who is me. Let me go to end this particular section with a a quote by Snoop Dogg. He said, I want to thank me for the time that I put in. I want to thank me for my success. I want to thank me for all the long hours, you know, because of course everybody gets up and they thank God. You got to understand who God is. God is you. So some people look at it and say, that was so arrogant, blah, blah, blah. Snoop Dogg was actually thanking the right person. He was thanking the God known as him. We call that God, I am. That's who you are. You know, we want to make ego this evil thing. I like to say that ego is expressing God oneself. Let me say it again. Ego expressing, experiencing God, oneself, ourself. I like oneself better. Ego, in its essence, is the me, myself, and I. When Jung and Sigmund Freud used ego, they were talking about the I of self. So when we say the paradigm, absolutely. So when we say that ego's bad, when they say that ego's bad, what you're saying in essence is, I'm bad. When you say that ego's this, when you're putting ego down at your core, you have to understand that ego is the I of self. Ego is God being experienced or identified as you. That's ego. And ego's goal is to help the spirit transition through this thing called reality. It's not bad. But if we can buy into ego being bad and we need a cure and we need to be saved from our sins and everything else, what we're saying is that the God as I am is bad. Ego's not bad. It's you. So anytime you hear somebody saying, what they're saying is that they're bad. Ego stands for I am. I am that. So let's move forward. So expect a delay. Okay. C stands for clean the surface of the mirror. A lot of times, many of us, the things that we're seeing in the mirror and we're not getting what it is that we want to have, do, or be, it's because there's debris, there's dust on our mirror. Now, the dust is internally. It's meta beliefs, beliefs that we don't even know that they're there. You know, sometimes they come up in our conversation. Can't trust rich people. Rich people are evil. Money's bad. You know, those are meta beliefs. We may never say it, but at our core. So if I get successful, people are going to talk about me. If I get paid to do what I'm doing, then, you know, I'm going to feel like I'm dirt because what I discovered, the people that get paid to do what they want, then they're evil. We have all these meta beliefs that need to be cleared out. As we begin to clear the mirror of reality and we let that nonsense go, that programming go, as Violet said recently, it's programming. And the programming is to keep you stuck. People, they come to me and I put something out there, video or whatever, and I'm telling them how great they are. I'm telling them how great they are. And we'll talk about meta beliefs later, Sam. But I'm telling them, but they're beliefs under the beliefs. There are beliefs that you don't even know that you believe until you start questioning and saying, where did that come from? So a lot of us are walking around living from meta beliefs, and we're wondering why our business doesn't take off. We wonder why our relationships don't take off. We wonder why there's always more month at the end of the money. And a lot of it is unseen because in our mind we say, money comes to me easily and effortlessly. I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm wise. You know, we have all these things that we're saying verbally, but at our core, as a man, woman thinks at their meta belief system, their core, so are they. So we have to be, and as the meta beliefs show up, because they will show up once you become aware. They don't all show up at once, but you start moving towards a business venture and you're like, what's going on here? Why am I feeling, distracted? Why am I not moving forward? This is a great opportunity. Oh, when I was growing up, it's like, let me give a quick story. A friend of mine's, she was going through this Reverend Ike study. It's like a 12-month study. And so her mom's a really religious person, and she told her mom about it. And she's like, Reverend Ike. Now, this woman, for those who know who Creflo is, not like Creflo, he's made a lot of changes in the last few years, but he's a pastor here in Atlanta. And he's a prosperity teacher. You know, people say, oh, prosperity. I don't know why people think God wants us broke. I don't. A God that says, listen, I take care of the lilies of the field and how they're clothed and how they beautifully arrayed, and the birds have no lack and no need. And he gives a thing called a seed, and the seed don't just give one seed when it reproduces, it gives a multiple, and we think that that's a God of lack. But anyway, so she was telling her mom about this study that she was going. She's like, Reverend Ike, hi. And she's like, I don't even know how my mom's got a problem with Reverend Ike when she goes to Creflo Dollar's church. I used to say in my other life that his name said it all, Creflo Dollar, because I was being critical. Creflo Dollar's an outstanding teacher. He had a lot of growth things that he had to go through, but he's an outstanding teacher. But anyway, she said, Reverend Ike. And my friend says to her mom, have you listened to anything about from Reverend Ike? She says, no. She says, so you're judging a man based off of somebody else's information that you learned at the age of 12 or earlier. Those are meta beliefs. Many of us are living, and we don't even know that, because educational systems understand from the time of 1 to the time of 7 is when most programming sticks. So that's why they're bombarding us with all this mess, as it were. You gotta go to school. You gotta get a job, keeping us in that perpetual cycle. And I speak highly of him as far as somebody that came from nothing, but there's a negative side, as with everybody. And I want to touch on this one. One week we're going to talk about the tree of good and evil, but we're not there this week. So, but I speak of J.D. Rockefeller. When these moguls, absolutely messy, these moguls in the early 1900s, and it was before them also, but these moguls in the early 1900s, but I'm speaking of J.D. Rockefeller. He said, listen, I'm going to give money for education. He said, but I have some criteria. The goal of education has been for the last 100 years, and still is to keep us as cogs. He says, I don't want them to think. I want them to respond. I want them to do what's being told to them. This is why when you're in school, you're kind of in a concentration camp, because you're being forced to sit in a seat 8 hours a day. That's what they do it for torture. I mean, literally, into our military background, that's what they do for torture. And they have you listening for 8 hours a day. This person talking at you, they're indoctrinating you. He says, I don't want them to think. I want them to do. I want them to build my companies. I want them to work for me. And then I want them to look at something as retired, and I want them to die, and then I want them to be replaced. That's the goal of education, government, religion, and a job. To keep you as a cog, not thinking. Education is not to teach you how to think. It's to teach you how to obey. Look it up for yourself. I know some of you say, oh, that's, education is to teach you how to obey. This is why when you're in school, I got a question, teacher. May I go to the bathroom? Then you go to a job, you asking a grown person, you saying, I gotta go to the bathroom. So you're asking, it's about controlling us. But I want to say this. I don't care what their agenda is for any 2030, whatever, we're 8 billion strong. Only thing we have to do is make up our mind, say, enough of this. And the system shuts down. It only runs because we believe in it. And as long as we believe in it and buy into it, they have power. I wish I could read all of that. That's so beautiful. If you can give me sentences watered down, Think and Grow Rich, absolutely. But even, listen, the wonderful thing about Think and Grow Rich, I got enough of that comment. In the future, give me a sentence, and then I'll run with the sentence. If you want to back it up with another sentence, I'll take the other sentence. You're absolutely right about Think and Grow Rich being watered down. When Napoleon Hill presented to the powers to be the original document, they're like, we can't put this out there because now we won't have people, they'll start creating businesses for themselves. So he had to come back, and initially they were going to call, they were trying to get a title for the book, and it says, and they told him, if you don't come up with a title, we're going to call this Use Your Noodle to Get the Caboodle. He's like, he said, if you use that title, you're going to ruin me. Absolutely. It was just stated that this perfect love casts out fear, but it's not about trying to control you. When I do these talks, people come on and they say what they believe and so forth, on my channel and so forth. And I'm like, you're absolutely correct. My job is not to tell you what to think, as Sam reminded me this week. My job is not to tell you what to think, but that you think. And according to as you think, you're going to be, do, or have. That's what's going to show up in your mirror. But everything that you see, even them talking about 2030 and everybody blast. I don't know how many of you seen the movie Sinners, but or any other vampire movie. The thing about a vampire movie is a thing about a vampire. Let me say it that way. The vampire, the spirit, has to be invited in. So when you give something your attention, that becomes an invitation. Now, the funny thing, you're bombarded by literally an infinite amount of thoughts. I can say trillions of thoughts, but it's even beyond that. So, and absolutely, the term itself, centered, actually is a term. It means ignorance. It says, if you're in sin, if you're in ignorance, it doesn't mean this. We made it this nefarious word, this evil word, this sin, to control you. It goes back to the word control. Sin, way early on in the Old English term, meant simply missing the mark. When you're off target. Evil meant missing the target altogether. But these were archery terms. So sin really meant miss. So let me get back on track. So with the vampire, you have to invite the vampire in before they can gain access. The wealthy understand that they need an invitation. So how do they get the invitation? They'll get people put out. Now, a lot of these are well-meaning people, but they'll get people out there saying, 2030, everything's going to shut down, blah, blah, blah. Now, when we start buying into the ideology of 2030, everything's going to shut down, that's their invitation, and we buy into it. So we begin to act as though we're powerless. There's a whole bunch of things that have been put into your food and so forth, and I don't want to get into it because it's going to sound like conspiracy theory and so forth. That's been put there to, I hate using the word, but I'm going to use it because it conveys, to dumb us down, to spiritually dumb us down. We're literally, I don't think that YouTube's going to take me down, but we're really, most of us are at a state of spiritual retardation. That's purposeful. This is why fluoride and everything else has been incorporated into our diets to keep us from using our pineal gland and so forth. As we start becoming aware and we realize that we're creators. See, this is one of the most powerful places that you can be, and this is not boasting on me. I'm just the deliverer of the message. When you start understanding that thought create realities, there are people like Greenberg. This was a Latino scientist. The people that come up with, they talk about the Gateway Project. All these things, science, this was a CIA project, basically showing that mind created reality. The funny thing is, when these people, these scientists, come up with this stuff, all of a sudden they disappear, they die prematurely. And so it's like 20, 30, 40 years that all of a sudden we get, thank you. Thank you for Jacob, and I'm messing his name up, Greenberg. But for those looking him up on YouTube, the guy was amazing. All of a sudden he disappeared because he started sharing things about the matrix. He called it the lattice, the hologram. Even the gentleman that came up with the hologram theory, young age, all of a sudden he dies. I don't think that this is a coincidence. And understand, they know how to make death look natural, like a heart attack. And again, I know this sounds like conspiracy theory, but do a check in history of all the people that come up with these great, there's multiple cures for cancer. We'll never see it because it's not monetarily beneficial to the powers that be. If these cures come across as free, they can't make money. They don't, they don't heal anybody. What they do is you get treatments, and the treatments are lifetime, whether it be for blood pressure, diabetes, whatever. They get you on medication, and the medication gets you on medication, they get you on medication, and it lasts a lifetime. Then they refill your slot with somebody else. And absolutely, there's been research talking about the benefits of fasting. So let me get back on track and touch on the stuff that needs to be touched on so we can finish up here. A lot of stuff going on, guys. My goal is not to tell you what to think, but that you think. And as you think, you do, you be, you have. It can't be otherwise. So for the person that comes and says, this is a bunch of BS, you're absolutely correct. And I will not be able to show you otherwise. Let's go and move forward. So clear the surface of the mirror. Deal with those. Be aware. Listen to your self-talk, as Mr. Lindo often says. But then start noticing. I'm going to do something with meta conversations and so forth. Not today, but I'll touch on those so that I can give you a deeper understanding of those meta beliefs. Okay, so then you got to transcend the state. So the T stands for transform the state. Arguing with the mirror, this thing called reality, this is why it's foolish to get into debates and so forth, doesn't change reality. The only thing that changes reality when you start changing yourself. You know, everybody wants to evangelize and change everybody. The person that you're responsible for changing is yourself. It's funny, when I quit trying to change my family and I started working on myself and they saw the changes in myself, they became open to change. If you want to change people's lives, start working on yourself, non-judgmentally interacting with them. And what you're going to discover is that many of these people will be open to change. You know, you start dealing with a racist and you start giving that racist love, for example. Now, not everybody's going to be won over. That's not the goal. But when you start showing, let's say, somebody that's operating from a place of hate, love, because most of them haven't experienced it before. It's like my brother and I were talking about, man, we could have really been messed up. But we were talking about, you know, things like molestation and so forth. And if you don't make a conscious effort to deal with those things, you become those things. And what we realize is that some of the people that were in our lives probably were molested themselves. I had a dear friend of mine, and I knew what he was going through in his home, is dealing with alcoholism and everything else. And this is a deep topic, so I won't go deep into it, but he was molested. So when he had children of his own, he became a molester, and he molested one of his daughters, and he spent some time in jail. And I told my brother, I know what happened, because that seed was passed on. I'm not justifying. Many of the people that you see acting out is because they're past it. So if we don't deal with those meta beliefs, those mindsets, and so forth, we repeat them. But once we begin to identify them and become aware, then we can change them. So that's on that. But you can transform your state by first and foremost beginning to, as simple and as magical and as metaphysical as this sounds, you start changing the image in your imagination. I've done this hundreds of times in my own life and seen my own life. I'm not even done. Sister, I'm not even going to put it out there, but I love you, and we've kind of discussed this, you know, off the side. So I'm sorry that that was the experience, but God has something much better for you. And I love you, and I say that. So when we start imagining, and that's what you did, you imagine yourself being, doing, having something different than what you experienced. And that's why you're the person that you are, and I appreciate you. So thanks for showing up. Once we start imagining, when I was working at the hospital at the age of 14 to 16, and I saw this old man making a certain amount of money. I said, I want to make that certain amount of money. Now, I didn't stay at the hospital. I moved on. I went into the military. I started doing. Once you start seeing it as possible, not the how, your only responsibility is to see it as possible. Once you start seeing what it is that you desire to be, do, or have as being possible, the means, the how, the bridge of incident will show up. But you got to sit in your mind's eye first. You got to start living from it first. When you start planting the seeds and acting it out, it's only a matter of time before it shows up in your reality. Okay. You know, I was thinking about, it just quickly flashed through my mind, thinking about Ray Kroc. No matter what you think about the man or Walt Disney, they used to be ambulance drivers in the military. They drove together. And I thought to myself, Walt Disney, Ray Kroc, what conversations did they have while driving that ambulance? What dreams did they talk about? Now, Ray Kroc didn't even know anything about no fast food. Walt Disney knew art, but he didn't understand anything about Disneyland. But these guys had to have massive dreams for two people to drive in the same ambulance during a war, and both of them become massive successes. What I'm saying to you is be mindful of who you're having conversations with, but also the conversations that you're having with yourself, because they will show up. Master teacher says, even the idle thoughts, even the idle thoughts will be accounted for in the day of judgment. Let me touch on this because I haven't touched on this in a while. When we're talking about idle thoughts in the day of judgment, this is not some day that God's coming through and saying, Violet, do you remember when you said, and all of a sudden you're being judged and he's writing? That's not that. Hopefully you didn't mind me using it as an example. I could have used Sam. Okay, but it's not that. The day of judgment is the fulfillment of that word. So let's say, love you, sister. Let's say that you say, it's going to be a terrible day. The day of judgment is the evidence of that day being. I knew this. I shouldn't have got out of bed. I knew this was going to be a terrible day. That's the day of judgment. Nothing ever works out for me. The day of judgment is the time that that word of nothing ever works out for me is fulfilled. Everything always works out for me. And you start looking for the evidence of the day of judgment is everything working out for you. It's positive and it's negative. But Master, she said, we will give an account even for the idle words. I'm just letting you know how powerful your words are. But don't get caught on this day of judgment. The guy's going through some great white throne judgment and some books are being pulled out and he's trying to. That's not the God we serve. This is the God that man teaches. God is love. Somebody spoke of love earlier. God is love. And Mr. Lindell says it's absolute love loves absolutely. So beautiful. Okay. Everything's up. That's the silvering in behind your mirror. Violet was saying that everything always works out for her. Get you a mantra. We're talking about a mirror. Like I told you, for those who may have missed it, behind the mirror there's filling. Some of it call it, silvering. And there's different levels and different qualities. This is why you can go into like a clothing store and all of a sudden you look glamorous because the silvering behind the mirror is a higher quality. The silvering for you is that mantra, that belief that you're holding every day. I have a lavish, steady, dependable income, consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. I don't know what your silvering is going to be, your phrase, your mantra, your affirmation is going to be, but create you something that dictates. So even when all things always work together for my good, things are conspiring for my good, whatever the silvering is, that phrase is, that one word that you can say no matter what's going on, and it brings you back in line, in vibration to frequency. I love myself. I love loving myself more and more every day. Absolutely. Start there. Start with love. Absolutely. Henry Ford's quote, if you think you can do a thing or you think you can't, you're correct. Create something for you. I can do all things. My thing is when I'm looking at something, if it's not, um, for example, I don't go out there and try to change the color of the sun or the color of the grass. But if there's something that can be changed, then my thing is, how can I figure it out? I know there's a solution. I don't need to know the answer. The only thing I need to know is that there's a solution. And whenever I'm going through something, the only thing I see is the end in mind. I see myself forecasting a week out, a month out, whatever, and the thing that I was processing is resolved. I don't worry about the how. And every time that thing gets resolved. One day I'll get into something real deep about myself and some things that happened. And when I was presented with them, I laughed because I'm like, I can't wait to see how this thing's going to be worked out. But I don't want to go into that right now. But anyway, so you got to transform the state. Begin occupying from the belief of the person that you want to be. As you hold that state long enough, it's going to become your reality. It may take the world without family, friends, strangers, loved ones, enemies, a moment to catch up with you. But over time, if you hold that state long enough, they have to acquiesce, even if they don't like it. Okay, so identity, versus the illusion. The identity is who you hold at your core. The illusion is reality of what everybody else says about you. I don't even have to stay on that. Like I said about Master Teacher, he was occupying from a place of Christ. We're all Christ. Christ means the anointing. It's just that most of us are not awake to who it is that we are. But he was operating from a place of Christ, and they wanted to remind him of the man. The man is the image that everybody else sees, and the woman is everybody else. You're a sister, you're a mother, you're a daughter, you're a friend. You're all these different people to different people, as it were. But who are you at your core? Who are you occupying at your core? You're a spiritual being having a human experience. You can clothe yourself in any persona. That's the beautiful thing. That's why I keep bringing it up. You don't have to be tomorrow who you are today if you decide to clothe yourself. Now, just because it doesn't take overnight and you don't feel like it overnight doesn't mean that the change, you got to abide in it long enough. Napoleon Bonaparte, some people say, you bring people and they're like, well, he was evil, blah, blah, blah. I'm speaking of the man that transformed his life. He was like 5'2", small man. And he says, how can I become, now he was a lieutenant. He asked the question, how can I become the most powerful man in the world? There was nothing outwardly that would say that this man was going to become one of the most powerful men in the world. But he believed it for himself, and he began living from that state. And he became a very powerful emperor, general, and so forth. Alexander the Great, the same thing. My whole point is when you're holding the image in your mind, it just takes reality a second to catch up, but it can't not if you hold it long enough. Just because it doesn't show up overnight doesn't mean that it's not taking place. Sometimes you got to let the seed germinate and get rid of some of those old weeds that you've been thinking for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So give it time, but occupy the state until it becomes your reality, no matter what the without says. So you got to operate from identity and not the illusion. The illusion changes. Mr. Linda was talking about, reality as opposed to this virtual reality. He says reality doesn't change. When you hold the image of who it is that you're being, doing, and having, that's not going to change. The outside and the clothes that you may put on may change, but who you are at your core, who you show up and who you clothe spirit in, that's what the world's going to see ultimately, but you got to hold it long enough. Okay, so when life happens, the O stands for, and then I got one more thing to cover. The out there, Bob is absolutely correct. The out there is not even the reality. As Mr. Linda calls it, it's a virtual reality. It's a hologram. It's a mirror. And it's a collective mirror. It says we're the Elohim, the one God made up of many. We're collectively and individually creating this thing called reality. So we're all shooting in on this hologram and creating it collectively as well as individually. So, but speaking of the hologram, Master Teacher says, judge not according to appearance. You got to look at what it is that's going on without judgment. And that's the hardest thing to do because we've been so programmed and indoctrinated to judge according to appearance. Absolutely. Father was saying the reality's in our head and it's projected outward. So collectively and individually, and this is funny, speaking of reality being in our head, this is funny because you could have two people who see the exact same event, whether it be a Bad Bunny concert or an accident, whatever, a wedding, go to a party. Two different people see the same thing. One says, that was the worst party ever. Another person says, man, it was the greatest party ever. Both at the same place, two different perspectives. What I'm saying to you, what you're projecting, a friend of mine went into the Corps before I went into the Corps, and it was the worst experience of his life. And fortunately, he was not the last person I talked to about going into the Corps. Because that may have been the worst experience. But I talked to a young man that was wise enough to say, you know what? It's what you make it. So if you go in there with a good attitude and you do what needs to be done, you'll promote, you'll do well. So that was my story. The Marine Corps was a wonderful experience for me. It wasn't a wonderful experience for everyone. My whole point to you, no matter what it is that I had a friend of mine, no matter where she moved, let me end with a Wayne Dyer. I'm going to come back to this Wayne Dyer story because I want to end with it. Notice change. That's my last letter, so I want to close it. So observe without judging and notice change. Not Violet touched on this, so I'm going to touch on this, but Violet said it. Nothing changes outwardly until something changes inwardly. So when you start changing your thinking, I had a young lady, she wanted coaching and so forth, and but she was just so downhearted on her family. I said, I can't work with you. I said, because you're cursing the thing that God's using to bless you. I said, until you change your attitude, nothing else is going to change. She listened to me. A few months later, she came back and said how her life had radically been transformed. When we're looking at this thing called reality, each person is going to see the reality according to as they see it. And as they see it, that's how it's going to keep showing up until they change how they see it. Wayne Dyer, for those who know him, was walking along the beach. And this reminds me of a friend of mine because no matter where she went, people didn't like people. People were mean, nasty, whatever. And at one point, I had to tell there's a common denominator, and I said it's you. But Wayne Dyer is walking along this beach, and this first couple approaches him, and they said, we were thinking about moving out here, and we're curious, how are the people out here? He says, well, let me ask you a question. How were the people where you came from? She said, you couldn't trust them. They were always stealing from you, people talking behind your back. Wayne Dyer said, they're pretty much the same here. So he's walking along the beach and he goes down a little bit further. Another couple approaches him. They says, how is it living out here? We've been thinking about moving out here and so forth. And how are the people? He said, well, let me ask you a question. How was it where you came from? He said, people were loving. The community was nice. People looked out for one another. We built some of the best relationships ever. He said, it's pretty much the same here. Guys, I love you. I appreciate you. Thanks for showing up. Hopefully you took something away from it. Till next week.